Hi, I'm Claire Williamson, an ex-litigator and the co-founder of Leading Minds. With 97% of lawyers complaining that stress is impacting their health, I think that it's time we speak about how challenging the pressures of the legal industry can be. So this podcast is a space where lawyers can discuss how they've overcome the challenges they face in their role and gone on to thrive within their career. Whether you're a trainee, a partner, or anyone in between, I really hope that this podcast will leave you feeling inspired, empowered, and with the confidence that you can leave your mark on the legal industry. So today, I'm really excited to be joined by Sana Shafi, who's a Travers Smith trainee and the founder of Strive, an initiative aiming for diversity and representation in the city. So Sana is going to be sharing with me how the ultimate procrastination during her exams actually led to her setting up Strive. So I can't wait to hear that story. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi. So thanks for joining me today, but I thought it'd be really interesting maybe to hear a little bit about your career to date. So how you kind of got into, where you're at.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and keep this brief. So
make it as long as you want. We've got all the time in the world.
We're gonna be here for a day and a half, Clara. Let's just stick to the quick version. So I basically went to Queen Mary University for my law degree. Before that, when I started thinking about what careers I wanted to go into, I was kind of a little bit all over the place, like every other 18-year-old. I was conflated between whether or not I wanted to go for corporate law, or at that time, as I knew it, just law, or if I wanted to be a medic. So that took, and they were both completely different.
I was going to say that's quite a choice.
It is. So I realized I like things on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. I have a thing for variety. So, and even when it came to my career choice, I really struggled. And ultimately, I did a bit of experience, and I realized that I would want to go down the law route. And my dad said, "That's not a surprise. You talk so much. I always knew that you were going to be." So there was that. So I applied for law at Queen Mary. Didn't really know much about what I was getting myself into. I don't really come from a legal background at all. So when I went for Queen Mary, I was kind of just thinking, let's just go and see what it's like. So I turned up, realized I was completely out of my depth. Everybody knew or seemed to know what they were doing. They knew about the legal industry, and I knew next to nothing. So I spent the first year just trying to get to grips with what law was really about, the jargon, the career side of things. What is a vacation scheme? What is a training contract? And what are law firms in the city? What does that even mean? What is commercial awareness? So loads and loads of questions. So I spent the first year, basically what I say, I played catch up basically for a year and a half. And then I started to apply for vacation schemes. I then got one at Travers Smith, McFarland's Latham & Watkins, and then I got my TC off the back of the Travers Smith vacation scheme, which I accepted. And since then, the rest is a history. Did my LPC, and here we are, a year on.
What stage of your traineeship are you in now?
So I've just started my third C. So I finished my first year, which sounds absolutely frightening. Because I feel as useful as a VAC schemer in my third C, but technically I am a third seater, so there you go. So yeah, I did corporate in my first, funds in my second, into employment next, and then where I'm currently, and then we'll see what comes up on my fourth C.
Nice. And do you feel so, because I remember being in my first C and just being like, and then second C was kind of like, I think I'm maybe getting this a little bit. By third C, I did definitely start to feel a little bit more settled, even if it was just with the way to communicate with people, or, the firm and how it kind of worked, and IT. Nearly got my head around that.
Yeah, I think there is definitely, I'm a little bit more comfortable. And sometimes I think, am I too comfortable? Should I be comfortable in a completely new seat? So I suppose in terms of knowledge-wise, I am at ground zero. I feel like I know next to nothing. And it's always the case when you move from seat to seat, because essentially do start at ground zero. But it makes such a difference because, as you say, you know the IT a little bit. I mean, I am sure IT is sick of me ringing them all the time and saying, hi, my Surface isn't working, guys. I don't have any internet today. I try and ring them about, I have a record. I try and ring them about once every day. So as long as but we're really friendly, IT. They have to remember me, right? It's one way to be memorable.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowing your way around the IT systems and document management systems, and actually knowing your way around the firm and how it works, and the fact that you're a little bit more familiar with the people that you're working with, and you've been here for a year. They're very small things, but it makes such a difference. And in some ways you are more comfortable in the way that you approach things. You also have an awareness of what the standard is, so you can work around that. You're more comfortable asking questions, and I suppose you build up this kind of general knowledge, which is quite useful, as compared to being in your first seat and having zero knowledge and just thinking, wow, what have I stepped into?
Yeah.
So that's quite nice.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember it very well. And I think like one thing I really remember as a trainee was kind of feeling very out of control. Like I didn't have much control of my workload or my deadlines. And as you said, those little things do actually start to build up a lot more quicker and make you feel a lot more comfortable in yourself. So even it is just knowing when to ask questions or when to ask for further instructions, or feeling a bit more able to say, actually, I don't know what you're asking me to do, and I suppose that's okay. When you're in your first seat, you're like, is this something I should know? Is this something I should, whereas I think once you get, a little bit further into your traineeship, you do start to feel a little bit more in control and how to push back and how to manage expectations as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's also an element of you just get comfortable with the fact that you know absolutely nothing, and a huge part of it actually comes from that, where I just think, okay, well, it's a new seat. I know nothing. They know I know nothing. So let's just ask away. Whereupon in the first seat there is a lot of apprehension. You're kind of thinking, oh, am I being annoying, or should I even be asking this? Whereupon in the third seat, I still have those thoughts, but it's kind of, I've become very used to ignoring all of them and just saying, all right, I'm just going to ask, let's see what happens.
And I'm sure also you probably, although you're saying I know nothing, I'm sure it's that you know a lot more than but it's often how to tackle things or how to kind of make judgments or how to go about tasks that I think once you get a bit of guidance, you then start to feel a little bit more flowing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot to say. And it goes back to the little things that build up over the course of the year. And by the time you end up in your third seat, you're not just more comfortable with with the fact that you know people, but you're more, to an extent, you kind of know where to find things. So you've learned how to approach tasks. So even if you don't know where the answer is, you can probably find out, and you know where to go to for those answers. You're more comfortable in looking in the right places, and all of those things, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's great to hear that you're doing so well and that you're kind of enjoying your traineeship. And what I would love to hear a little bit about is your initiative, Strive. So what actually led you to start this initiative? And maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what it's about. I gave a brief introduction, but I'm sure you'll do it far more justice than I did.
Yes, I mean, I have to say that your introduction was great, Claire, so no complaints from me. In terms of expanding on it, what it's about, I think it makes sense to start at the beginning and how we founded it. And I know I've spoken to you about this, how my procrastination led me to finding it. I was in my third year of uni exams, and we all know how much procrastination hits when you're at the final hurdle, not hurdle. And I was thinking, and all of a sudden I had this idea, and I thought there is a gap in the market for support services for law students that isn't being covered by existing providers. And I kind of thought, why not have something in place that really tackles social mobility head on and really focuses on intersectionality, and it's really about true diversity. And what I wanted to do with Strive was exactly that, working, because everyone is talking about diversity, and diversity is such a hot topic right now. It's almost become a buzzword, and at that time I remember thinking it'd be nice to have something that actually did what it said on the tin, and was working towards representative diversity at its key focus, really tackling some of the issues that we currently have at a very grassroots level rather than at just surface level. So yeah, there I was procrastinating for exams, and I suddenly thought, let's set up an entire organization, because that's not stressful at all, right? You're stressed because you have exams.
Just doing a bit of Facebook scrolling. I mean, I must say that really does go above and beyond the procrastination I managed during my final exam. So well done. I think you need applauded for that one.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I don't think procrastination is ever something to be applauded for, but in this case, here we are. It worked out. So yeah, we kind of set up Strive in 2018, So now it's been 2 years since then. We are now in our third year of operations, and it's been a really interesting time for us. There's been a lot of growth over the past 2 years. We went from being just myself and my co-founder to being a team of about 20 volunteers at the last headcount. And on top of that, we have about an additional 20 mentors and incoming, roughly about 10 to 15 brand ambassadors that are going to be joining us at a later course of the year. So there's really a lot of people that are involved with this, which is kind of crazy for me to have seen it go from basically a concept to what it is now. It's been a really, really exciting time for us.
Yeah, amazing. And just to kind of get a little bit more background, so what kind of led you to actually feel that this was something that needed and why it was so important to you?
Yeah, so I suppose the answer to that lies in two parts, really. So one is primarily a lot to do with my own journey. So, and I know I touched upon it very, very briefly, but I come from an extremely kind of non-traditional law background. Don't really come from a family of lawyers, didn't really know anyone that was a lawyer, attended a state school that was 5 minutes from my house because it was convenient to go to and come back. And that was a criteria when we were selecting schools. And I kind of just fell into law, I say almost accidentally, because while I knew that I at some stage wanted to be a lawyer at a career level, I didn't really know what that meant. I fell into Queen Mary also somewhat accidentally. I basically, when we were considering universities, I just went for almost any university that was in London. I wasn't really, I knew I wanted to go to a good university, didn't really understand what the definition of a good university was at that time. And I certainly didn't understand that there were nuances within the Russell Group university tier itself. So I kind of went into uni pretty blindly. And then even my journey throughout university was when I actually realized that I was very, very behind the rest of my peers in terms of career planning and what that looked like. And secondly, when I looked around at the support services that were available, there didn't really seem to be anything that was targeting diversity from all angles. So there were organizations that were targeting racial diversity, there were organizations that were targeting, let's say, pure social mobility, but I didn't really feel that they were looking at a very kind of deep level in terms of what that diversity looked like. And so for me, when I think about diversity, it really means representative and true diversity, in the sense that you have to go into the details of what it actually means to be diverse. And for me, that means diversity of backgrounds. And I didn't see anything that was specifically focusing on intersectionality, diversity of backgrounds, and all of those combined elements of diversity, and specifically looking at accessibility as a underlying feature of why is it that the law profession in itself, why is it so diverse? And a lot of it is to do with the fact that it's not particularly accessible to the wider population. And you've got these issues that even if you do make it into Russell Group, for instance, there are so many tiers to the Russell Group, and typically a lot of the hires that are made in the city firms come from the top 10. And there's a really interesting piece of research from a Chamber student that looks at the numbers, and it found that on the lower tier, so everything below the top 10 to 12, the percentage of representation from lower tier Russell Group institutions, it dropped to about 10 to 20%, which meant that 80% came from the top 10 to 12, which is a pretty shocking number considering that this is just a Russell Group that we're looking at. And then in addition, you also have a non-Russell Group talent. And I thought it was quite important to, when you look at diversity, to encompass all of those different categories.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you say that, because I actually come from quite a more similar background to you than kind of maybe the people that I was seeing around me in kind of, well, you know, I went to one of the Magic Circle firms, coming from, you know, a really nice place, but again, school was based on location. I didn't go to I wasn't privately educated. And I always remember when I joined the LPC, someone said to me, "Where did you school?" And I was like, "I went to Westhill Academy. I don't think you'd have heard of it." Like, I was really confused by the question. I didn't even know, and this is really embarrassing, that boarding school was an actual thing. I just thought it was very like Famous Five. Like, people didn't actually get sent to boarding school, because I'd never experienced that. And I hadn't known anyone that had been sent away to boarding school, because it just wasn't a thing. Or even private school. Like, I didn't know anyone that went to private school. And then when I went to uni, I stayed in Aberdeen actually, just because it felt like the most accessible thing for me at that time, rather than kind of traveling, or like kind of moving away. I actually lived at home whilst I went to uni. And then I decided I was going to live in London, and I Googled top 5 law firms and started working my way through those, because the London firms didn't come to Aberdeen University for the graduate recruitment fairs. So yeah, I really kind of feel like that as well, that I kind of fell into it, and I was very fortunate that I ended up where I did, because really the odds were quite against me in some ways, that I didn't know how you were meant to act, or that maybe that's why I ended up falling into it, because I didn't know how much the odds were against me to be, working at a Magic Circle law firm.
Yeah, no, I completely hear that. And it's actually really interesting to talk about private schools and grammar schools. I knew that there was a category of schools that fell in that, and that was purely because I did sociology at GCSE.
Yeah.
So I had some kind of insight. Never really met anyone that had attended a private school or a boarding school, or even a top tier grammar school. To be completely honest, those kind of concepts were very alien to me, and certainly in the school that I went to, that was never something that we spoke about. And when it came to going on to university, I suppose one of the things that is important to note is when I was actually at school, I never felt disadvantaged in any way. And I think that is actually part of the problem, is that you don't really see the disadvantage when you're with a group of equally disadvantaged people. You're kind of in it together, so to speak. And when it came to choosing universities, again, there wasn't really that much in terms of information that was provided. And I certainly didn't think that I should be looking anything beyond school to find that information. So school was my only source of trying to find out what university was all about. I mean, my parents are first gen. I myself am a first gen. So for us to talk about universities, I mean, we knew what university was. Did we know anything beyond it? No. It was very much like, we just need to get you to uni, and then going to uni equals a good job, and that is very much the concept.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And like you said, like, I'm not saying, oh, poor me, I came from an awful background. Like, I didn't, like, I really did, but I didn't realize. And even when it was kind of looking at universities, it was kind of, do you want to go to Aberdeen, or you could go really far, 2 hours down the road, to Glasgow or Edinburgh? And I was like, that's too far, so it's kind of like, I just kind of fell into it. So yeah, and I always, even doing the podcast now, I speak to people and hearing about like how they got into the legal industry, I always think, oh my God, like they just knew so much compared to what I did, that I just kind of kept moving forward, and it kind of worked. But I hadn't got this like massive plan that everyone else seems to have, because I didn't have the information. I didn't know all.
Yeah, no, I completely and it was very likewise. I kind of, when I first had training contracts, honestly, I had no idea what it meant. I had people talking about vac schemes, and I thought, honestly, this is really funny, but I always understood vacation to mean the US version of a holiday. So I don't know why everybody was talking about a holiday during law school. And not that I ever admitted it, but I am admitting it out loud now, because it's just one of those things that you don't think about asking, because it seems to be that you're the only one that doesn't know. And that's when I actually started to kind of Google and came across all a plethora of information that I just didn't know what to do with. And I didn't, it was a bit daunting to actually start filtering through all of that information and find out what it was that I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I just decided on corporate commercial law, because I was fortunate enough to go out there and get some experience myself, and experience a couple of criminal and family and these other areas before I decided that I really, really enjoyed business. So I was in retail at that time. I was working for a very small startup, and I loved it. I had such a great time. Definitely one of the best kind of years so far. And I thought, this is really it. I really like business. I'm quite entrepreneurial, and also having I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. So it made sense for me to go into corporate commercial law. But sometimes I wonder that if I didn't have those experiences that I did, or I wasn't particularly business minded, how I would have come to that determination of where I wanted to be. I just feel like it would have been a little bit more of a challenging journey.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I don't even know if I did make a conscious decision. I think it was just kind of like, next step, okay. And like you, like there's certain things I look back and I completely cringe. I'm like, how did I not know that? Like I remember when I didn't even really necessarily realize that, I mean, I knew the Scottish system was different from the English legal system, but then having spent 4 years training as a Scottish lawyer, then being like, oh, I'm gonna have to do the GDL, like I didn't even know. It's just like, how did I not know that? But I didn't come from a background that people were talking about these things, you know. It very much was, yeah, play it by ear. And in terms of Strive now, so what ways do you kind of you know, help people to kind of create this diversity and inclusion and representation?
Yeah, so I think with us, it starts with trying to find talent that may go unnoticed by firms. And the reason why I say that is because we try and look for potential, and that is a lot more difficult to ascertain when your candidate has a BB at A level and has gone to a pretty average school and a pretty average university, and they've had it looks like a fairly average journey on the paper. And we try and we go above and beyond that. So we really look deep into what kind of school they attended. So it's really contextual recruitment, but in-depth contextual recruitment with a human element. And I'm keen to emphasize the human element bit, because I think that systems are great, but to an extent they don't really identify the stories behind the individual. And that's where it's really important to supplement it with the human side, which can identify that. So we identify talent on the basis of both data as well as human analysis. So what we will do is we will look at where the candidate comes from, their entire story from basically beginning to finish, how they have achieved at each of those stages. And based on that, we will track their progress. And if on that basis, we kind of think that, you know, given the circumstances, this candidate has performed exceptionally well, then at that stage, we would invite them onto our program. And as part of that process, we would look at everything from what kind of family do they come from, the size of their family, where they went to school, where they live, their upbringing, and things like what do their parents do, as well as how many hours do they work, why are they working these kind of hours. So we really look in, we try and leave no stone unturned in our background, and it takes a lot of time and it's quite resource intensive. But you know, someone's got to do it. So, and that's when we decided that, you know, that someone is going to have to be us, because we recognize that it is very labor intensive. It requires a lot of time to manually do those, go through that information, locate it and interview these students and really get to the bottom of it, and then to go back and analyze it. It's not an easy task, but I think if we want to go towards diversity, which is a representative and which is true, it needs to be done. And I think, because the way that I see it, and the business case on my side is basically that where you have students that have a group of people that have come from a very kind of similar background, despite the fact that they look the same, and they may have, of course, faced obstacles. And I am in no way undermining that, you know, coming from a different background presents its own challenges that do need to be addressed. But when you add in social mobility to the mix and you add in all the socioeconomic factors, it is so much more difficult and it's so much more arduous. And that journey that you experience from that background and making it into the city, I find that that is such an important part of the kind of thinking that you then bring to a corporate. And if we want real diversity, we're going to need people that think differently. And if you want to find people that think differently, they need to be from very, very different backgrounds and very, very different experiences, because ultimately we are shaped by our thoughts and we're shaped by our experiences and we are shaped by where we come from. And if you just end up in a room where everybody looks different but have had largely similar or to a degree of similarity in their backgrounds, ultimately we'll end up with a degree of similar thinking.
Mm-hmm. Hugely, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so fascinating hearing you speak so openly about it, because as you said, kind of diversity and inclusion has almost became a bit of a buzzword. And you actually kind of very openly say that you want it to be more than a tick box exercise, which I think is very bold to actually say so openly, because I think a lot of people maybe feel, well, we are doing things, but like you said, it's not necessarily just about looking different. It's about actually really truly coming from those different backgrounds that then gives you that kind of difference of perception, different skill sets. You know, it doesn't obviously automatically mean that, but generally kind of does.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, to say that as a tick box exercise, it is a bold statement. And the reason why it's there is because it's again to get people to think about it. Why do we care about diversity in the first place? It's because there is a very strong business case for it. But aside from that, not only is there a strong business case, but also it is the right thing to do. It makes no sense that London, which is so diverse when you step outside, but somehow when you step into law firm offices, the diversity that exists on the streets is not replicated internally. And there is a problem, especially when you look at other industries. If you look at accounting or finance, for instance, they are significantly more diverse than law firms are. And it's not a question of talent. I really don't believe when I hear the fact that, oh, we just could not find diverse talent, because the talent is there. It simply cannot be the case that the talent doesn't exist. It does exist. It's just a matter of finding it and being willing to adapt and make it work.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And do you ever get worried that people will maybe be not offended, but people will kind of think, as you said, it's a bold statement, that it might get people's back up, or it might kind of work against you? Do you ever kind of worry about that? I think as a trainee, I was very, sorry to give that context as to why I'm saying that. I think as a trainee, I was always kind of, it was implied that it's safe to stay under the net and kind of stay like not bring too much attention to yourself. And what I absolutely love from doing this podcast is the amount of really interesting trainees who are doing things and saying things and having opinions. And I just think, oh, I wish I'd done that, or I'd kind of had more clout when I was a trainee to do that. But it just always felt like I shouldn't really say too much in case it worked against me. So it's interesting, having you say these bold statements.
Yeah, well, I think we can kind of summarize down to two things. One, so a lot of it just comes from me as a person. I'm a massive believer in having difficult conversations. I am a huge believer in saying things quite directly. And of course, there is a way to say things, and being direct does not mean to be offensive. And that's not what it's about at all. But I do think that it's important to have very open conversations, and openness is a huge part of moving diversity forward. And it's a huge part of moving anything forward. I think I always think that, if everyone just kind of stays under the radar, and we accept the system for what it is, we won't change anything, because nobody's voicing that there is a concern or that things aren't working. And I think it's important to admit when things aren't working. It's important to say that we could do things differently. And it's important to think, not just think, but to also express those thoughts appropriately, of course, and in the right forum. But it's important to have those conversations and to have those discussions, and to really be authentic.
Yeah.
And which brings me to the second point, that authenticity for me is a huge part of everything, of not just what I do with Strive, but also myself as a person, both within my professional life as well as my personal life. I think people resonate when you're authentic and you're being your true self as far as you possibly can. And authenticity, it's so important when it comes to building relationships. And I don't worry about whether this is too bold. I think if you want to engage in dialogue, it's important to have those thoughts and to express them. And really, hopefully, at that stage, people will tell you whether or not they agree, whether or not they disagree, and you can engage in discussion. And there are two sides to every person, right? So we all have different perspectives, and it's important to voice those perspectives and engage in conversation on those things.
Yeah, I just think it's phenomenal. And actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking, I mean, I speak very, obviously, my passion and my drive is around about creating openness and awareness around about mental health. And I do have those conversations, and I do say the things that everyone else is kind of brushing to the side. So maybe I have learned and developed a little bit more than I'd kind of anticipated, because when you started saying it, I was like, actually, no, maybe I give myself too much hard time. But I think many people will find that really interesting, hearing that, because I do think there's like a really fine line between being professional and showing your personality, and trying to find that balancing act for many people can be quite difficult and quite stressful. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting side of things. The other thing I wanted to know was, so you said in terms of obviously do a lot of research and a lot of kind of thorough background checks to help people get onto your program. So what do your programs actually involve?
Yeah, so our program, it's a year-long program, and we have programs for both undergrads, we have programs for penultimate year students, or those that will be applying. We say penultimate years, but in reality it's open to anybody that thinks that they'll be applying for a training contract during this cycle. And then we also have one for first years, and that is very much students are either in the first years or they are in their second year of a 4-year degree, or people that are very much starting out or at a very, very early stage of their legal career. So, and as part of that, it's a year-long program, and we cover 20 hours of theory classes. So this is very much about trying to explain the theory behind what working in the city is really like. It's to really provide a level of just a kind of an introductory element to what the city is, what a legal career is all about, what to expect from the application process. And it's all about education. And a huge part of what we do at Strive, it is on the educational element, because especially when I was going through it, I found that a lot of it wasn't to do with capability. A lot of it was that I just didn't know what it was about. And you know, you come to assessment center with students that are far, far ahead of the game, and they know what it's all about, and they've got access to that information. And for us, we believe that equality starts from an equality of education, an equality of having the same, an equality of opportunities. So through the program, we aim to provide that equality of education and that equality of opportunities that their peers at other institutions would have had access to throughout their time at university and even pre-university. So that's the purpose of the theory, is to provide that insight and that knowledge. And then after that, we have hands-on support. So this is a year-long mentoring that they will then have access to on a one-to-one basis with their mentors for the rest of the year. And then in addition to that, we also provide assessment center and application support. So really trying to help them with the way that they draft their applications, because I find that a lot of it does just come down to not knowing how to actually present yourselves on paper. And I was having this conversation with one of my partners a couple of days ago, where I said, I remember when I did my first ever application draft on the question of why do you want to be a corporate lawyer, I poured my heart out. Yeah. Honestly, I sat down and I kind of gave a whole story about why I thought that corporate law was the profession for me. And, you know, it was very passionate, it was very flowy, and it was very rambly. And a lot of it, you just don't know how to present yourself in a written form. So we hope that through the program, we can kind of teach students the skills of presenting yourself on paper and help them to evidence what it is that they're trying to say and communicate in a way that's clear and concise and would get them to the next stage.
Oh, I'm just like nodding along, like, yes, because there's so many things that I just can really relate to and just really feel as well. Like, I even remember just when I like entered the legal profession, not really, like, I really found it easy to communicate with like support staff because I felt like they came from a more similar background to me. And I'm not saying that everyone, I mean, there was a lot of diversity within and people from very different backgrounds within my trainee intake, but I always felt a bit like uncertain that it just wasn't like the people that I'd been brought up with. And you know, like, I know that sounds really stupid, but I found that really difficult. And like partners just felt like I couldn't speak to them, that they were very personable and they were very lovely, but I was still a bit terrified of them, like what if I said something wrong, or you know, I just didn't really feel like I had that skill set to kind of put that perception of myself that across that I wanted to. So I think giving people these skill sets both for applications but also when they're entering is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think I really hear that actually, and what you said about the fact that you haven't grown up with people of a certain background, and the fact that you felt closer to support staff because those are the people that was familiar. I think that's a really important point because and it echoes quite a lot on the whole diversity front, and one of the reasons why we don't see that many students from disadvantaged backgrounds trying to make it to the seat, and even when they do, being unsuccessful, has a lot to do with the people that they have had exposure to as they were growing up. And quite simply put, I believe you can't be something that you have not seen. And it's difficult to be inspired by, it's difficult to, I suppose, imagine yourself in an environment that is so alien to you, or that you just don't know anyone in your circle that you can talk to about it, or you can even ask questions even on a curiosity level as to what that's like and determine. It's really difficult to then say, oh, you know what, I fancy a career in this new world that I know nothing about and I know no one in. That is really an important point, I think, that perhaps doesn't get discussed as much.
And gosh, I by no means, as I said earlier, came from like a disadvantaged background. Like I really didn't. But even thinking about, like, I just felt I was scared in case I asked a stupid question. That was the thing that got me. So it might have been about boarding school, or it might have been about Oxford and Cambridge, which just felt like almost like Hogwarts to me. Like I didn't, I'd never been there. It was completely different from where I went to uni. And I just was always scared in case I said something really stupid and almost like showed myself for my background, if that makes sense. Did you ever feel that, or have you heard anyone say that to you before?
I think, Claire, I love your openness. I think that is, again, such
Maybe too open again.
No, I love it. I am a huge fan, so I have no problems. I love this kind of conversation because I think it's so important for people to hear those experiences and for it to be expressed and for it to be put out there. It's so crucial. I completely understand where you're coming from about this whole. You're in this new environment where everyone seems to come from a different background to you, and that background is so far removed from anything that you've seen or experienced or interacted with, that in a way you kind of feel as if you're the other, and you're really keen to blend in and one, and you're super keen to get stuck in and do the work and get along with everyone. That it's almost kind of, you're afraid to say or do anything that will draw attention to the fact that you are different. And for me, I always think that difference is to be celebrated. And I think I've come to that conclusion primarily because I simply can't hide. And when I first started out on my legal journey and I was attending these open days, the few that I did get into, I remember feeling completely alien in a room. And simply because as a hijabi girl, there is literally nowhere for me to go. I'm one person. I couldn't hide even if I wanted to. So, and I think because of that, I've become very comfortable. Once I got over that thought that, oh my God, I'm not fitting in, and I realized that I would never fit in, and that's okay. I got to a stage where you could then celebrate being different. And once you get to that stage, all of a sudden, you're able to really be comfortable talking to everybody, and you can have these conversations, and you can be open, and you can be honest. But it is a bit of a mind block, almost, that until you get to that stage is quite difficult. And I think I was quite fortunate in one way, that because I look so openly different and so visibly different, that I had to get over that mind block pretty quickly, compared to I generally feel that if I had been if I wasn't a hijabi, or if I wasn't visibly Muslim, and that if I had come from just a social mobility background, I probably would have struggled with that mind block of not drawing attention to my differences for a lot longer than I did, simply because I just had to bite a bullet at some stage and go for it.
Whereas I was too scared to open my mouth, because then I was like, they're gonna know. It's gonna be shown. I even remember stupid things like, I just wasn't really sure what to wear, or I didn't really have anyone to ask, what should I be wearing to, join a Magic Circle law firm, because I didn't have anyone that had done that. And it was very different from maybe my friends who were going to kind of more local Aberdeen offices, or, my mum, like, ask her. I mean, she worked in an office, she's, works in accounts, but it wasn't the same thing. And I just found that was like all those little things, it becomes like all these little differences that add up and make you just be like, oh my God. And I think things have definitely changed. I mean, I was a trainee 12 years ago. We're going back to the age thing that we spoke about before the podcast. We won't go there. Definitely 25, guys. But yeah, no. So, we are going. So I think things have definitely changed and definitely moved on. And although there was a diverse, intake that I was amongst, it still was just, it felt like there still was like a way. And then I was maybe trying to fit into that. And that was probably my perception rather than necessarily anyone else telling me I had to do that. So it sometimes comes from a two-pronged approach. It's not always the law firm saying this, it's often ourselves that we're expecting that ourselves of ourselves.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I probably felt like I was the elephant in the room, and I am quite sure that nobody, I'm sure people kind of looked at me because, let's be honest, there wasn't anyone else that looked like me. But I don't think it ever crossed their mind again that,
Yeah.
there she is. In my case, I really felt it. I just sat there. I remember being at this particular open day, and I just remember sitting right at the back and thinking, and the first thing that I did, and I used to do that quite a lot, is every time I'd walk into a new environment or walk into a new room, the first thing I would do is I would scan the audience to see, or whoever the speakers were, or I'd scan the room to see if there was anyone that I could have something in common with. I'd look for that degree of commonality. And you can't really see social mobility, right? That's really difficult. Social mobility is something you can only find out through conversation. But I would try and look around for some kind of anyone that was either Asian or that looked like they hadn't come from the same background as everybody else. And it was such and I'm sure that it was something that I definitely did put on myself, just because I was the one in a room that didn't quite fit in. And I really, really felt that difference internally far more than anyone else in the room did. I'm sure that everybody else in the room kind of looked around and went, oh, she's, and then they kind of moved on. And I felt that everybody's going to be looking at me the whole time. They all know I'm here. Oh God, what do I do? Just made it into a whole big mess than it needed to be.
Hugely. And the one thing that I remember as well from my first day was the whole, tell us something interesting about yourself that nobody would know. Oh my, you know, it was like, what's appropriate here? What's expected of me? Like, don't pick me first. Just all of those things. I don't know if you ever had to do anything like that, but that really threw me.
Oh, we had so many. It was a favorite at all the open days and all the icebreakers. But to be honest, by the time I actually started, and maybe this is why I was a lot more comfortable, by the time I started to get to the vacation scheme stage, I kind of I had fully accepted that I did not stand a chance of fitting in, and that was fine. And I fully got to the stage of saying, yeah, let's celebrate this. Let's celebrate the fact that you look totally different, and it's fine. So by the time that question came around, I had so many different experiences. I kind of thought, I'm just going to stick this out there. It's not going to compare to anything else that anyone else is going to say, but this is my interesting thing. Like, this is the interesting thing about me. So it is what it is. So I kind of just put it out there, and I thought, it's fine. It doesn't matter, it's out there.
Amazing. I mean, I could honestly speak to you about this for so long. It's really refreshing to be able to have those conversations and say, actually, you know, but I think in any way, you know, whether you went to one of the top universities, whether you did go to boarding school, whether you knew exactly what you should be wearing on the first day because your dad's a lawyer or whatever else, I think everyone has that, right? They have that like imposter syndrome and questioning and comparing themselves to others. So I think there is obviously like added elements for you know, if you look different or you come from a different background, but I think everyone has that as well. So I don't want to downplay anyone else who maybe, you know, has entered the legal profession in a different way or comes from a different background and thinking that they feel that they shouldn't be there either, you know.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really important. And imposter syndrome, I think it affects I think it's safe to say it affects pretty much everyone, regardless of where you come from. Of course, there are degrees to it, and there are degrees to everything. And it's kind of thinking about how it's these little factors that add up. And for one person, you end up with loads and loads and loads of little factors, which means that their level of imposter syndrome is at a completely different scale than somebody else. But that being said, all of us are in the same environment, and we're with very, very intelligent people, very, very clever people. And it's natural to kind of feel, oh my God, everybody is so put together. What am I doing here? And I think that is not something that, you know, is uncommon to the majority.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to keep talking to you about this, but I'm conscious of time and that we need to tie up the interview now. So I've always finished with a couple of questions. And the first thing I'd really like to know is, what does resilience mean to you?
Resilience. I just define resilience as the ability to get to the goal that you've set for yourself, or the goal that has been set, regardless of the obstacles that come in your way. And if that means that you need to change the way that you get there, if that means that instead of it taking, 2 minutes is now going to take you 5. It's all about the way that you respond to the challenges that have been placed in front of you and that target that you need to get to. And for me, resilience is getting to that target and finding creative solutions around it and trying to come up with various ways that you could tackle it. And I think it's something that is developed over time. I don't think anyone is born resilient. I think we are shaped. Resilience is one of those things that's definitely shaped by experiences rather than just being born with an ability to be resilient.
Yeah, no, definitely. Another thing I'd really love to know is, what's your top tip for sustainable success within the legal industry?
Sustainable
experience so far. Yeah, sustainable success.
And do you mean that in terms of just outside, everything that you do at work, or is it encompassing all of it?
Encompassing, yeah. What do you think kind of makes it all come together for you?
So for me, I think it's quite a few things. So one, it's the way that you actually work. You can't be consistently on work mode, not talk to anybody, and just put your head down and get on with it. There is a support network at work, and I think it's really, really important to use that support network. And it's important to talk to your partners, and it's important to communicate your expectations and understand what is required of you. It's doing all of these small things and keeping communications going between you and your team and everybody else that is integral to your working life, to make sure that you are happy at work, and that, because I think it's really important that you are actually happy at work, that you have enough freedom to do the work that you've been required to do, that you're being challenged enough. Yeah. So it's important to keep communications going, and when things get too much, to say, I think this is a little bit too much, and rather than just suffering in silence, which it might seem like a sensible solution, but and it's really difficult when you're a trainee to say no. It's very difficult when you've got a partner giving you work and you are slammed with 6 other tasks, to turn around and say no to a partner. It's exceptionally difficult, but I think it's worse to take that work on
100%
and not finish it in time, or to do a really bad job of it, or to not deliver it by the deadline, when, as difficult as it would have been to say no, chances are they could have found somebody else, or they would have managed it, or they could have taken some work off you somewhere, or extended deadlines. There is always a way. I'm a huge believer that there is always a solution to every problem. So whatever problem you have, you've got to be able to communicate that problem in the first instance and then get to the solution. Outside of work, I think it's important to have things that drive you outside of work. Law has a way of seeping into every corner of your life. And I think it's important to have hobbies that you can do outside of work, a network, a support network outside of work, whether that's your friends or your family. So for me, it's all about finding that balance. So yes, I work hard, and when I'm at work, I work extremely hard, but at the same time, I also have to manage Strive, which takes a fair amount of my time. And I'm fortunate to be in a firm that allows me to do that, and I'm quite happy to speak to the firm about it all the time and say, I've got this on, and I'm doing this with Strive, and the firm is incredibly supportive of that, so which is helpful. But again, I could not expect that level of support if I didn't communicate that in the first instance. So it's wanted to keep the firm updated. So even if you are doing something like a triathlon, it might seem completely irrelevant, but there are ways that you can manage it, and it's really important to keep having these conversations. Having a strong network of friends. I like to see my friends quite often, or as much as is possible. And I would recommend for every trainee to make those plans, even if you have to cancel it. Make them anyway, because at the very least, your friends are seeing that you're making an effort and you're trying to make these plans, and you've got something to work towards, even if that doesn't happen. I think when you don't make plans, you run the risk of kind of saying, well, I've got nothing on tonight, so I'm quite happy to stay here for another 2 or 5 hours, which is not helpful. Exercise is great, and try and get outdoors. So it's all these, trying to do these small things, it builds up and it affects your day significantly.
Massively. I mean, you've just done my job for me, which is good. And the final thing I'd love to know is, who inspires you within the legal industry?
Who inspires me within the legal industry? I would say this is not a biased answer at all, but the people that I've had exposure to within the legal industry, a lot of it has come from within Travers. So I would say I'm inspired by, in fact, some of the partners that I've been fortunate enough to have a very, very good relationship with. And even outside of Travers, I really love the work that Dan Winterfield does over at Reed Smith. I think he's doing an incredible job. So I'm a huge fan
Daniel
of that.
Winterfeld not inspire is all I can say. He was actually my first guest on the podcast, and I was like, wow, I'm set myself up for failure. I'm never going to meet this again, but amazing.
Dan is amazing. But I am very fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of partners that I really, really look up to. And I have a lot of respect, not just for what they do, but also just the way that they do it. And in a way, I'm very grateful to be able to have very, very open conversations and pick up some nuggets of advice along the way.
Amazing. And I know at the moment as well that you're, kind of looking at growing Stride even further. And where can everyone that's maybe working within the legal industry that would like to kind of help in whatever way, whether that's volunteering, whether that's partnering, and help you kind of grow the brand and the initiative, where can they where's best to access you? Is it on LinkedIn or is it on your website?
I would say LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great way. The website is also great. We do have a contact form that does get picked up quite frequently, but somehow it would always kind of end up the long way around and find itself back to me. So just come to me directly and find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing, some insight into the work that you're doing. I just think it's absolutely phenomenal to hear you. So inspirational and just the movement that you've managed to create as well is just phenomenal. So thanks for all the work you do and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire. It's been wonderful
It's been a great chat. I feel like I overshared way too much about how much I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but people are going to be a lawyer.
That's a good thing. I think it's all good. It's important to share all of these experiences. And I look forward to catching up soon.
Yeah, me too. And for everyone that's listening to the podcast, please do go and have a look at Strive. I do really think their work's phenomenal. Also follow us on Leading Minds on LinkedIn to be kept up to date with with weekly podcast episodes, and subscribe on our website, leadingmindsglobal.com/podcast, to be sent the emails, the new podcast, the weekly podcast, direct to your inbox. So thanks so much for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thanks.